Your brain doesn't care if your thoughts are true. It just believes what you repeat. Hi everyone, I'm Sergio Popovici, and today we're going to talk about something that neuroscientists discovered that's absolutely mind-blowing. Your brain is not a truth detector, it's a repetition machine. And I'll explain why this is so important, because understanding this could completely transform how you talk to yourself. Your brain doesn't care whether the thought, "I'm not good enough," is actually true. It only cares that you keep repeating it. And every single time you repeat a thought, your brain physically changes to make that thought easier to think again. This is called neuroplasticity, and it's one of the most important discoveries in modern neuroscience. Let me start by explaining what's actually happening in your brain when you think the same thought repeatedly. Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb discovered something fascinating back in 1949, published in his groundbreaking book, The Organization of Behavior. Hebb found that when neurons fire together repeatedly, they literally wire together, meaning the connection between them gets stronger. This is now called Hebb's law, and it's summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. What this means in practical terms is that every thought you think creates a neural pathway, a physical connection between brain cells. The first time you think a new thought, it's like walking through a dense forest where there's no path. It takes effort and energy. But the second time you think that same thought, it's slightly easier because you're following the same route. By the 100th time, the 1000th time, you've created a well-worn path, a neural superhighway that your brain travels automatically. Now here's what's crucial to understand. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a thought that's true and a thought that you just keep repeating. Research by psychiatrist Jeffrey Schwartz, published in his 2002 book The Mind and the Brain, Neuroplasticity and the Power of Mental Force, demonstrated this phenomenon clearly. Schwartz worked with OCD patients and showed that their compulsive thoughts had created actual structural changes in their brains. Not because the thoughts were true, but because they were repeated. Brain scans showed that the more someone repeated an anxious or intrusive thought, the stronger the neural pathways associated with that thought became. Your brain was literally reshaping itself based on repetition, not truth. This is why someone can intellectually know that they're competent and worthy, but still feel worthless, because they've been repeating, "I'm not good enough," so many times that it's become a neural superhighway. The rational knowledge that it's not true is like a small dirt path, while the repeated negative thought is a 6-lane highway. Now let me explain what neuroplasticity actually means and why this matters so much for your mental health. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. For decades, scientists believed that after childhood, your brain was essentially fixed, that you couldn't change fundamental patterns. But research over the past 30 years has completely overturned that idea. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin conducted groundbreaking research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2003. Davidson studied Buddhist monks who had practiced meditation for tens of thousands of hours and compared their brain scans to novice meditators. He found that the monks had literally rewired their brains. Areas associated with compassion, attention, and emotional regulation were significantly larger and more active. This wasn't genetic. These were changes produced by what they practiced thinking. The study proved that you can intentionally reshape your brain structure through repeated mental practices. Now let's talk about what this means for negative self-talk and limiting beliefs. When you constantly think, "I'm not good enough," your brain treats this as an instruction, not a question. It doesn't evaluate whether this statement is objectively true. It just recognizes that this is a pattern you're practicing. And according to Hebb's law, the brain strengthens whatever you practice. Psychologist Carol Dweck's research, published in her 2006 book Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, showed exactly how this plays out. Dweck studied students with fixed mindsets versus growth mindsets and found that their self-talk literally predicted their brain's response to challenges. Students who repeatedly told themselves, "I'm not smart enough," showed decreased activation in learning-related brain areas when facing difficult problems. Students who told themselves, "I can learn this," showed increased activation and actual structural changes in their brains over time. The difference wasn't their innate ability, it was what they practiced thinking. Now here's something really important that most people don't understand. Your thoughts are not harmless. They are instructions your brain is actively following. When you repeat, "I'll figure it out," your brain doesn't question whether you currently know how. It starts building the neural infrastructure to make that statement true. When you repeat, "I'm not good enough," your brain doesn't evaluate your worth. It starts building the neural infrastructure to make that statement feel true. Neuroscientist Joe Dispenza, in his 2012 book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, explains that your personality is essentially a set of memorized behaviors and emotional reactions. And these behaviors and reactions are the result of repeated thoughts that have become hardwired neural patterns. Dispenza's research showed that people could measurably change their brain structure by consciously changing their thought patterns over 60 to 90 days. Brain scans of participants who practiced new thought patterns showed actual physical changes in brain density and connectivity. Your brain was literally becoming what they were thinking. Now let's address what happens when you try to change negative thought patterns and why it feels so difficult at first. Remember that analogy about the forest path versus the superhighway. When you've been thinking, "I'm not good enough," for years, that's a neural superhighway. When you start thinking, "I am capable and worthy," that's a tiny dirt path that barely exists. Your brain naturally defaults to the superhighway because it's easier, more familiar, and requires less energy. This is why positive affirmations can feel fake or useless at first. You're trying to drive on a path that barely exists while a massive highway is right there. But here's the crucial insight from neuroscience. Every single time you choose the new thought over the old one, you're making that new path stronger. Research on habit formation shows that it takes approximately 66 days of consistent practice to create a new automatic pattern. That's not motivational talk. That's measurable neuroplasticity happening in your brain. The first 2 weeks feel the hardest because the old pathway is still dominant and the new one is barely visible. But around week 3 or 4, something shifts. The new pathway is becoming more established and the old one is starting to weaken from disuse. By week 8 to 12, the new thought pattern can become as automatic as the old one was. Now let me give you the specific mechanism that makes this work, because understanding the science helps you trust the process. When you think a new thought that contradicts your usual pattern, you're creating something called cognitive dissonance. Your brain notices the mismatch between your old neural highway and this new direction you're trying to go. Initially, this feels uncomfortable. Your brain is essentially saying, "This isn't our usual route. Are you sure?" But if you keep choosing the new thought despite the discomfort, your brain begins to strengthen that pathway through a process involving brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is like fertilizer for neural connections. It helps new pathways grow and strengthen. Research shows that certain practices increase BDNF production: deliberate mental practice, physical exercise, adequate sleep, and stress management. This is why changing your self-talk is most effective when combined with these other brain-healthy behaviors. Now let's talk about the practical application of this neuroscience to your daily life. First, you need to become aware of what you're actually repeating in your mind throughout the day. Most negative self-talk is so automatic that you don't even notice you're doing it. It's just background noise. Start by simply noticing. What do you tell yourself when you make a mistake? When you look in the mirror? When you face a challenge? Write down the actual phrases you repeat most often. These phrases are your current neural superhighways, and they're running automatically, whether you consciously agree with them or not. Second, you need to deliberately choose a replacement thought, not a positive affirmation that feels completely fake, but a thought that's believable and helpful. If I'm not good enough is your current highway. I am perfectly capable might feel too far from your current belief to stick. Try something like I'm learning and improving, or I can figure this out, something your brain can actually accept. The key is that it needs to be something you can repeat with at least some degree of belief. Third, you need to catch and redirect. Every single time the old thought appears, you consciously choose the new one instead. This is the actual practice that rewires your brain. It's not about never having the old thought again. It's about not following it down the highway. Research shows that the old pathway doesn't disappear. It just weakens from disuse while the new pathway gets stronger from practice. You're literally competing for neural real estate. And attention is what determines which pathway wins. Fourth, you need consistency over intensity. Thinking your new thought once with incredible intensity doesn't create lasting change. Thinking it 30 times throughout the day with moderate attention rewires your brain. Neuroplasticity requires repetition. You're creating a new automatic pattern, and that only happens through consistent practice. Now let's address what research says about how long this actually takes and what to expect during the process. Studies on neuroplasticity show that measurable brain changes begin within 2 to 4 weeks of consistent practice. Participants in meditation studies showed increased gray matter density in regions associated with their practiced thoughts after just 8 weeks. People practicing new thought patterns in cognitive behavioral therapy showed measurable changes in brain activation patterns after 10 to 12 weeks. The timeline varies by person and by how deeply the old pattern is ingrained, but the science is clear. Your brain will change if you consistently give it new instructions. Here's something crucial that Schwartz's research revealed. The discomfort you feel when redirecting thoughts is actually a sign the process is working. That resistance is your brain recognizing that you're trying to override an established pattern. If changing your thoughts felt easy and comfortable from day one, it would mean you weren't actually challenging an existing neural pathway. The discomfort is proof that neuroplasticity is happening. Your brain is in the process of rewiring. Now, before we close, I want to address something really important. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending problems don't exist. This is about recognizing that your brain will strengthen whatever you repeat. So you need to be intentional about what that is. You can acknowledge reality while still choosing thoughts that serve you. This is difficult and I can handle it is very different from this is difficult, I'll never be able to do this, I'm not capable. Both acknowledge the challenge, but one builds a pathway toward capability while the other builds a pathway toward helplessness. Research on learned helplessness versus learned optimism shows that the difference in outcomes comes down to habitual explanatory style. The thoughts you repeat about your experiences. Your brain is listening to every thought you think and using those thoughts as instructions for how to wire itself. When you understand that your thoughts aren't neutral observations but active instructions your brain is following, it changes everything. You realize you have tremendous power over your own neurological development. If you're struggling with deeply ingrained negative thought patterns, experiencing intrusive thoughts that feel impossible to change, or need professional support in rewiring unhelpful mental habits, therapy can help. I offer psychological consultation services in Munich, Germany, and work specifically with cognitive behavioral approaches and neuroplasticity-based interventions. Thank you for watching Psychology with Sergiu Popovici. If this video helped you understand how your brain works and why your thoughts matter so much, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Be careful what you repeat because your brain is always listening and always becoming.